Hello, welcome to the Smart Buildings Power Hour. My name is Marcella Walsh, Live Content Coordinator at AVIXA. Today we'll be discussing workplace and health. We'll hear about one of the first buildings in the U.S. designed for the post-COVID-19 environment. Before we begin the discussion, please note the following. This webinar has been approved for 1 CTS RU for those viewing live. Please allow 5 to 7 business days for the RU to appear on your transcript. If you've got a question, email webinars@avixa.org. The webinar will be approximately 45 to 60 minutes and all attendees will be placed on mute. Click the speech bubble icon to open the event chat and let us know where you are logging in from today and what topics you would like to see in future power hours. If you have questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A window so the moderator can address them during the webinar. The Q&A window can be found by clicking the icon at the bottom of your video box. Please do not enter your questions into the chat window. You will have access to this recorded webinar at avixa.org/webinars within about 5 business days. You can also access other Smart Buildings Power Hour webinars at the same link. Joining us today is our Smart Buildings Power Hour Moderator-in-Chief, Bob Snyder, Editor-in-Chief of Channel Media. Bob is the publisher of Smart Building News, Digital Signage News EMEA, European Solution Provider, and more. For the past 10 years, he has been the content chairman for the Smart Building Conference at ISE. And now I'll hand things over to Bob.
Hi, and welcome everybody. I'm going to share my screen quickly, and we will show you a couple slides. So what I'd like to do is just explain that today's session is going to be on workplace and health. And it's part of the extended Smart Building Power Hour series. And you can see here we're on the number 9 in the series. We've come a long way, but we've come to a very important juncture. The changing nature of the workplace and the implications on the pandemic on the health have left us in a very interesting situation that creates opportunities as well as all the obvious problems. I'd like to introduce my speakers today, and I have for you, I have as experts Steve Fay, who is the CEO of Totem Buildings. And Steve is an experienced leader and entrepreneur in the building controls industry, starting with Andover Controls and most recently as the president of Tridium. After leaving Tridium, Steve served as president of an IT managed service firm in Richmond, Virginia. Today, as CEO of Totem Buildings, Steve is combining his experience in building controls with his recently acquired knowledge of IT networks, servers, and cybersecurity to lead Totem Buildings in the development of the industry's first OT, operational technology, risk management software platform. Thank you, Steve, for joining us. I'd also am pleased to have with us Darlene Pope, who is the president of North America for Planet. And Darlene Pope is I wouldn't say newly appointed, but recently appointed, and is of course someone whose career I've followed, in the industry. And at Planet, which is a fully integrated smart workplace software program platform, she is bringing her experience as a smart building industry veteran with 25 years of experience in commercial real estate. Most recently, she served as global head of the smart buildings and digital workplace at WeWork and EVP Global.
Bob, you've frozen and we can't hear you.
And technology consulting for the commercial real estate. She was named Visionary of the Year in DC in 2016, a Da Vinci Gold Award winner, and received the President's Award for Excellence at JLL in 2017. And is one of BizNow's Power Women in Commercial Real Estate, and recently named one of the top 10 women in technology by Connected Real Estate Management. Our third speaker, I'd like to introduce Maureen Ehrenberg, who is an internationally recognized expert on the real estate business transformation, strategic redesign for the future work and facility management. She serves as an advisor and board to global organizations, investors, real estate technology providers. With more than 25 years experience, she has a deep expertise in providing real estate advice to services and companies globally. Before founding Blue Sky, Maureen was the global head of real estate operations and strategic services.
Bob, we've lost your audio. Sorry about that, everyone. We seem to have lost Bob's audio. I know he had an initial question he wanted to ask the audience, which was, if you had one word to describe the smart building industry right now, what would it be? And if you could start putting those words in the chat, that would be great.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody.
Bob, we're still having trouble hearing you.
Oh, okay.
And we cannot see you now.
Your video's frozen.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Sorry, folks.
Well, we can hear you now. So at least if you want to continue on with the audio, I think maybe the video is what was making the problem, causing a problem.
I'm a little confused by what's happening because my screen shows everything fine. So let me just kick in here and see. Okay, well, folks, did you hear my introductions?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. All right. So maybe Marcella, you can take over the screen, and while I sort this out for a second.
Sure.
And I can continue the audio.
Did you want me to share something on the screen, Bob?
Yeah, just to have something there, just have the PowerPoint background for a minute.
Sure.
I do apologize to the audience. We've done this 9 times before without any problem, so I'm not sure. My screen now says Zoom not responding.
Try
Okay.
logging out, logging back in, maybe?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We apologize for the technical difficulties, folks, but I have been adding your words to the chat, so.
Marcella, do you just want to get going with the first question? Well, we wait for Bob to.
I actually don't have Bob's questions, unfortunately.
Okay.
I could go ahead and read it if you'd like. The first question was, if you had one word to describe the smart workplace of tomorrow, which word would you pick and why? So Darlene, you want to start?
Sure, absolutely. So the word that I picked for that is integrated. So when we look at the workplace of the future, the integration between digital workplace and smart buildings, I think is going to be absolutely critical. So if we don't have integration, what we're going to end up with is chaos and multiple sources of truth and data residing in multiple platforms. And you really don't have an opportunity for value if you've got things that are disconnected. And right now, the way that organizations typically buy solutions and manage the workplace is independent point solutions. And so I think when you look at the opportunity to make things smart, we've got to have the ability to integrate. And whether that's integrating occupancy and room booking, or room booking and lighting, or lighting and HVAC, or visitor management and access control, the smart workplace of the future has to be integrated.
Thank you, Darlene. That's perfect. And thank you for covering for me while I was off resuming. All right. Maureen, what word would you pick?
I chose the word fusion, Bob. I feel like there's a convergence between the buildings themselves, the workplace and the technology that's integrating all of the points that Darlene spoke about. And the reason that that's happening is people are looking for a myriad of workplace solutions, dispersed portfolios. There are different solutions. And through that sort of fusion of that, you can connect these disparate workplaces where you can work from anywhere and work from everywhere. And that's going to be very important going forward. So a big part of this, though, you talk about health. I just want to talk about the fact that if you can pull all those pieces together and integrate for that consistency that Darlene's talking about, that's where you get compliance, safety, and trust, which is really going to be the name of the game right now, returning to work.
Right, we have two good words. Steve, your word.
My word is informative, and it basically builds on everything that Maureen and Darlene just talked about. But as an occupant, I want to have knowledge accessible to me about what my environment is like. You know, from the temperature, humidity, location, and security, whatever it is that I think is important to me as an occupant. I want that information at my fingertips. And we've grown up in a world where a lot of that knowledge is locked away, if you will, in the building systems that are installed and only available primarily to the facility staff. So we've got to breach that divide or gap and make that information accessible. But it has to be accessible in a way that doesn't violate the security of other tenants or the security of the system itself, but really empowers that occupant to know what's going on in their space and then to take necessary action. The other thing that's a part and parcel to this that's particularly come out as a result of COVID is the additional information that tenants want to have. So a lot of systems that are in buildings today don't necessarily have good air quality sensing going on, or they don't have location information available. So there's going to be a definite desire to add more information so that, again, tenants feel confident about what's going on when they enter and operate throughout the facility.
Now, I'd like to ask the audience, there's almost 200 of you there, to also throw up a word on the chat that you feel might best describe the smart workplace from your own point of view. And if you might put that on the chat, we'll come back to that a little bit later on. My word, I was going to throw in hybrid. It's the word of the day. Okay, it is the word being bantered around, but I think it implies this delicate balance between the work from home and the more not necessarily traditional, but the current in-person workplace. So hybrid might be an interesting word that we can have as well. So let's talk about this. And Darlene, if you don't mind, if I could start with you about COVID-19. How has it altered the smart workplace and impacted the smart buildings market from your point of view as someone who's making the integrated workplace management system software that helps drive it? What do you see going on here?
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to go back to is, we talk about the workplace of the future and we talk about the smart workplace of tomorrow. I think we should really be talking about the smart workplace of today and what we need now, not necessarily what we need in the future. And the reason I say that is because, COVID, I think, caught everyone completely off guard in terms of how we manage occupancy. We should have been managing occupancy and location of people within the space long before COVID ever hit. But now we're faced with a situation where you have to monitor and manage the number of people in your space, whether it's for permitted occupancy and you're only allowed to have 50% of permitted occupancy. Well, that's great, but how do you measure that? And how do you manage that? You can't do it with just badge swipe data, which is how most people determine, occupancy. So I think one thing that COVID has done in terms of bringing smart workplace to the forefront is it makes us realize that we should have had this data in the first place and that you can't go back to work without solving for occupancy, and not just again, not just badge swipe data, but we need to know how the workplace is being used, where my people are right now, where my people were an hour ago, because things like, nobody wants to come into the workplace and sit at a desk that somebody else sat at an hour ago that hasn't been cleaned yet. And so if you don't have real-time location-based occupancy data, you might as well scrap people coming back into the workplace, because I think that's the number one data set that we need to solve for. We should have been solving for it prior to COVID, but COVID has brought it to the forefront where you can't get people to come back to work without that information.
And it's so, it's such a perfect statement, Darlene. Yeah, we should have had it in the first place. I mean, that we did try to tell people, we did offer it. And, again, the stakeholders, were reluctant, and they got caught out this time by that. Now, the second, interesting point from your comment is that all the companies need this, companies of different sizes, and the audience whose job it is to provide technology solutions, should realize that this is something their clients need, and they got to get it from somewhere. And there's not exactly an existing, channel that these people are buying from, because it's all new for them, because they passed on it the first time, right?
And I think the most important message in that is that this is not just for COVID, right? I think more companies spent more money on stickers on the floor and signs on the wall. Don't sit here, don't stand here, make sure you have 6 feet, as opposed to looking at how we can implement technology that we should have been implementing in the first place. And when this COVID thing is all past us, which is probably another, hopefully 6 to 12 months away, we still need that data, even in a post-COVID world.
We still need it. Maureen.
Yeah, when I looked at that question, I really thought of three primary things that occurred and the impact for smart workplace during COVID. And one is it really definitely accelerated the interest in smart buildings and getting the privilege of focus to understand better the industry, getting more common language and understanding, which helped. One thing that Steve mentioned, and I think it's one of the most important things in regard to health and well-being, is the understanding, finally, the true understanding of how operations really matter. Operations technology, how the buildings operate, but more so, there was this whole area of, they were calling it the hygiene theater that went on very early, and you can read about it in the Wall Street Journal. Joe Allen talks a lot about it from Harvard, but hygiene theater and all this cleaning. And when it came down to it, it was really about airborne transmissions. And the fact that indoor air quality right now is regulated outside, but when you get into a building, short of construction, there's very little regulation around air and transmissions, how much fresh air is coming in. There was some studies that were very important around workplace experience several years ago around cognitive function and getting sleepy and all the other impacts of really cutting down your fresh air supply. But now with the increased need for filters, what is the quality of that indoor air environment and how healthy is your building and how you're operating it? And obviously light and acoustics and all that come into it. It's critical. And then ultimately then the biggest impact that we're seeing from a real estate perspective is that all of this renewed focus and interest has really begun to bridge the gap between landlords and tenants and a more common understanding of the impact of prop tech and the need for workplace and the way that tenants are looking at workplace.
Yeah, it's a shame it took a pandemic to bring us together on it, but you're right. Steve, can I turn to you and say, from your point of view, how has the pandemic altered your looking at the smart workplace and the smart buildings market?
So building systems are, whether it's building automation, lighting, access elevators, all of this they're all smart systems today. They're all network accessible. And from, my focus for the last couple of years has been on the cyber side of things. And as a result of COVID, the attitude has been, we don't want you coming to our building, even if you need to service it. So it raises the whole issue of remote access. And from a cyber perspective, a lot of businesses decided a while ago that they just weren't going to provide remote access because it was considered to be too big of a risk. So it's forced their hand to you can't have both, right? So if you're not going to let the contractors come into the building, then you're going to have to give them remote access. And that raises the issue of how. So, and there are very good answers for that question today, but there's a whole education process that's going on right now in a very fast and furious way to try to adapt to that need. And it's been driven by COVID, because it's a lot easier if you can have your contractors service these systems remotely, so you minimize the amount of time they were on site.
And that leads perfectly into my next question, because the pandemic has created opportunities as well as forcing some change. And I want to bring in first, before we discuss those opportunities, one of the audience questions, which, turn back, Maureen, to your point on indoor air quality monitoring. So who drives the decision to introduce such monitors in enterprises? Who's going to take that decision?
Well, that is actually a much more holistic opportunity there, because ultimately what we're seeing is that human resource groups are getting far more interested in understanding impact on employee experience. And as long as the operational teams are understanding that they were struggling for years between, well, gosh, if we just kind of really shut down the dampers and bring in as little fresh air as possible, we can really save on energy. But they're creating very sleepy environments that, of course, much easier to transmit not only sickness and everything else. So ultimately, the idea of opening up the dampers, this is an area now Steve is an expert in, bringing in that fresh air and then understanding what that impact is on the employee productivity and just the wellness quotient. Obviously, it does not mean you don't have to put hand sanitizer out and enforce washing hands and mask wearing, but ultimately it solves for a lot rather than, trying to clean every surface every minute. And this is part of research that's going on that you're beginning to see coming through the CDC and other areas. Ultimately, what would be fantastic for our industry is to start getting some air quality measures and monitors that would be regulated within the built environment rather than just outside, because it kind of stops right at the front door of the building. And the older buildings are some of the buildings that, unless the windows operate, you're really in a pretty tricky environment from an operating perspective.
And I think there are some solutions that are being incorporated through the heating ventilation side, and there are other solutions that are trying to be incorporated mainly on monitoring through the Internet of Things side.
Well, monitoring, yes, and then the filters, right, Bob? I mean, filters have been a huge piece. They weren't using, really strong enough filters, good quality of cleaning the air as well.
Yeah.
But as far as monitoring, there are all sorts of, as far as fresh air changes that people are monitoring, how many times an hour is fresh air being brought in? And then again, looking at measures and feedback, one thing that, for example, if I look at like what Siemens has done with Comfy, this idea where even your occupants can indicate not only comfort, but then also if it is getting a little stale, other features that are really not attractive, like odors. These are things that they can start to get much more automatic feedback, as well as use of sensors.
Things which might have been dismissed before the pandemic. Darlene, opportunities, pandemic, what do you see as some of the opportunities that the pandemic might have created for people who are addressing the technology needs of smart buildings?
Well, again, we talk about indoor air quality. That's something that should have been addressed before COVID. These should not be COVID related discussions. Unfortunately, this is the catalyst that brought it to the forefront. But I think what we're also seeing is a lot of companies are still, they're kind of waiting it out. They're still not implementing the initiatives that they need to implement from a technology standpoint to be ready to go back to work. And again, occupancy detection based on location of people on a real-time basis. Indoor air quality. I mean, Maureen mentioned this balance between bringing in fresh air versus managing your energy costs. Well, guess what? Most companies are still focused on managing their energy costs. And so I think there's a lot of companies that are still on this pause waiting for herd immunity, and then they're going to go back to business as usual, unfortunately. So I think what we really have to do is demonstrate that this is not just a COVID pandemic related movement, right? This is, we've all been in this space for 25, 30 years now. I think what COVID did is it's a catalyst to demonstrate the need and the value. But we do have to make sure we're not talking about these changes as it relates to COVID, because COVID's going to go away eventually, and we don't want to go back to business as usual. So if we can use this as a catalyst, and if we're looking at all the health and wellness tools that we need to implement in the workplace, they should be there regardless of COVID. Things like mobile apps for the workplace. And the reason I mention mobile apps is because people are now very conscious of touchless technologies. Nobody wants to get in an elevator and push a button that somebody else pushed. So even post-COVID, we all still have this mentality that you don't want to touch, we used to teach our kids, don't touch the hand railing because 1,000 people have touched it. Da, da, da. That's going to be the mentality of people coming back to work. So things like mobile apps, things like personal controls that you can control over your individual device, as opposed to common controls where you either have to, push a button on an elevator, or when you're coming out of the bathroom and they have those smiley face things, how was your experience? We're not going to have any of that anymore, because first of all, having those buttons in the bathroom is gross to begin with, but nobody's going to want to touch something that someone else has touched. So I think what COVID's going to do is make us think differently about the way that people use the workplace, and look at technologies that can help eliminate those concerns, again, even way post-COVID, to add to health and wellness, to add to productivity, to add to efficiency, and to add to that overall end user experience.
And the newest buildings that have gone up, since the pandemic, are focusing on this touchless technology as much as possible. I saw one in Chicago that used a new elevator system from Canada that has foot pedals for you to determine which floor you're going on. And the newest building in New York uses a smartphone app like you described for people to get in and out with a touchless experience of their buildings. So that's certainly true. I'm going to ask Steve a question regarding cybersecurity, because I see that as part of the health issues. But before I do that, I want to mention the Microsoft report. I don't know if you saw, Microsoft issued a very big report on the future of workplace. They went on CNN and all these channels to talk about it. And when I read the report, I found it frightening, extremely frightening. 3 or 4 of the conclusions were, one, the stakeholders are oblivious to the fact that the workers are very unhappy with what's going on and how things are going. That is, some of the companies are still getting great results and still doing business, and they're performing fine, and the management is going, oh, okay, we're getting through this. Great, And the Microsoft survey said 43% of the employees are looking for jobs right now. And they're because some of them feel frustrated. Some of them feel that their employers don't care about their safety. And some of them are now enabled because they've been working from home, and they figured, well, what the heck, I might as well go down to Fiji and work there, and I can have new opportunities and new things. But it's created this, according to Microsoft, which, if I remember right, it was like 1,600 companies that they interviewed and presented. And the other point I want to mention before we move on is just that Generation X was the one that suffered the most from it and felt alienated from the workforce. On top of that, Steve, if I can turn to you, because again, cybersecurity is something to do with health of the building. It's something to do with everybody in the building in many different ways. What are the cybersecurities and operational mismanagement risks of the smart workplace?
Well, it's such a fundamental issue, Bob. We've grown up, all of the IoT technology that's evolved over the past 3 decades has been focused on operational effectiveness, efficiency, energy savings, comfort, security, certainly from a physical perspective, safety, things of that sort. But no one, frankly, as an industry overall, we've not paid attention to the fact that we've created a bunch of ticking time bombs with respect to cyber risk. because the entire industry across the value chain has never been asked to take cyber seriously. So when you learn about a control system, whatever your particular silo is that you operate in, it's all about the functionality of the system itself. How do I make it? How do I make the building comfortable? How do I make my AV system do what it needs to do for conferencing and so on? And yet, from a underlying technology stuff, it's basically IT technology. And the IT industry spends hundreds of billions of dollars annually to protect their IT systems. And despite that expenditure, still suffers major outages. Just think of what happened with SolarWinds recently. Okay, so our industry, OT, operational technology, there's not even a good number on it. It's so small. So we're at the crawl stage. And so the first thing is just to build awareness and understanding that this is not something we can ignore, and that the systems that we put in our buildings and rely upon are just as vulnerable, if not, frankly, they're more vulnerable because very few protections have been put in place. There are exceptions, of course, there are companies who are taking it seriously, but overall, no. One of the things we do is we rate buildings in this area, and generally our scores are D's and F's, just to give you a sense, a proportion. So because of COVID, as I mentioned earlier, we increasingly have to go to remote operations. So that's a major area of focus, is how do we protect these systems for remote access, knowing that that's how we need to run our buildings in the future. And it's not just how you run the buildings, but the smarter the building becomes, the more the data wants to proliferate. One system wants, as we mentioned, very early on in today's call, all these systems want to, in some way or another, share information, and you want to have analytics that allows for better maintenance, better energy management, better system utilization. So that means we want to share the information. So how do I do that securely? I've got a whole bunch of people that don't work for me. They work for my vendors. How do I manage the risk of all these people that don't work for me? So there's tons of questions, and we're at the beginning of the journey. And COVID has certainly highlighted the remote access issue in particular. Beyond that, it's just, frankly, a lot of companies are at a practical level because of COVID. They're more concerned right now about how to get people back to work and get them in the building safely than they are about necessarily trying to solve this cybersecurity problem that's in front of them. But the one area that they are paying attention to is on remote access.
And again, from my point of view, until we start considering cyber health, there's risks implied for the people in the building. I mean, risk of losing your own personal data, but also risk now that we're going to depend so much upon indoor air quality and other things in the building that, people can mess with it. It's just not right.
Well, if I can add
Sure.
to that just a little bit, Bob, I think, from a security standpoint, again, if you go back to the word integration, and we're looking at, all of this data being integrated and systems being integrated, and you raise additional risk the more systems you connect to the outside world. So this whole concept of remote access, I mean, what we're seeing now is disparate systems with multiple routers and multiple points and multiple communications means to get data from inside the building, outside the building. And so it continues to multiply the risk. And so, for example, you've got CO2 sensors that are going to a router that are sending data out, perhaps over a cellular communication. Then you've got energy meters that are collecting energy data and going to a router and sending out that energy data to a third party that's going to be reporting your energy data. You've got your BMS that's going out through a completely different router that's then going to a third party that's managing your BMS and your operational side. So you've got multiple routers, multiple systems, multiple communications pathways that are all vulnerable to data breaches, data security. So if we go back to that word integration, and you've got all of your systems being integrated to a single gateway and a single router through a single communications protocol to a secure cloud server, where now you've got data governance, data security, data management, And you're really able to pull it all together in the same way we look at an enterprise network and we look at all the components and the data on an enterprise network as one secure solution. We have to start applying that same methodology to integrating and connecting all the different building systems and the different building data in one single secure manner.
So where are all the cyber hackers that are going to block my energy usage from my energy suppliers? Those are the hackers I'm most looking forward to. Okay, so here we are. I have a question from the audience. I think we kind of covered, but just so we clearly cover, it's our viewpoint on energy efficiency versus maintaining good indoor air quality. You know, I think Maureen, you mentioned this originally. You know, is it, you know, a trade-off? Is it that much of a trade-off?
If the studies that have been done, the trade-off in the people piece. So Darlene's been using this for years, but the 330-300, right? So if your utilities are $3 a foot and you've got a very robust strategy around your sustainability programs, right? So you are looking at solar, you're looking at wind, you're looking at you know, diverting from landfill. You're really focused on sustainability. The idea of bringing in more fresh air as one component to impact that, even if you kept it really tight, it's pennies on $3 as far as energy savings if you're going to keep your dampers really tight. And that's the only thing you're looking at. And that's not your only lever for savings and also just for carbon reduction. But on human productivity, if your people cost at least $300 a foot, if not more, and you're creating a work environment that is at best sleepy and worse, making people sick, you've got more sick days related to the fact you've got a closed envelope, people can't focus, the cognitive functions down. There have been studies on this, there's published reports on this. The cost on your people is far more expensive on a percentage of loss of productivity on that $300 a foot than it is the 10 or 20% you're going to save on the 3. So things I would reference, and we'll give you some links, but a lot of the research that's been done, particularly out of Harvard, Joseph Allen's work in this area, it's published studies. They've actually created findings globally on what this actually has to do with impact on the workplace and productivity. And the idea of really truly understanding what type of work environment you're creating is actually front of mind for a lot of the OEMs as well as the managers.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Maureen. I'm going to ask the audience again, if you have questions, to type them in the question and answer tab on the Zoom system here, and we'll be happy to try our best. We don't know everything, but we know somebody that knows something, so we'll do our best to help you out. I have to turn back now to the panel and ask about which products might help us get back in the office and which integrations are vital to implementing the solutions that will get us ahead. You know, would anybody like to step forward on that?
I'll take a stab at the first response to that. And again,
Thank
my
you.
word for the day is integration. So looking at solutions that are able to provide a single integrated platform and that are able to integrate with other platforms, I think is going to be critical for whether it's smart building, smart workplace, health and wellness. It's really, if you look at the and I'm not going to say the future of work, the now of work, everything is so highly data driven. We have to have the ability to manage all that data and understand what all that data means, and also be able to determine which data is valuable and which data is less valuable. So from an integration standpoint, we have to be able to pull all that data into one single secure location. So when you're looking at integrated platforms, you have to make sure that either you're getting one platform that does it all, and quite frankly, I've yet to see one platform that does it all, or at least a platform that checks the box on most of the things that you need to do, but also has the ability through APIs and SDKs to integrate with other platforms. And that's really what's going to give you that seamless ability to manage all your data, to be able to show your data in in dashboards, reports, to be able to show correlations among different data sets like occupancy and energy consumption, indoor air quality and energy consumption. So to Maureen's point earlier, in terms of the balance between IAQ and energy use, how are we going to make that decision if we can't collect the data and understand the cost implications of, guess what, I'm bringing in twice as much outside air. It has caused my energy to go up X%, and that's associated with this cost. And therefore, if I'm making the decision from a business standpoint that I want to improve my indoor air quality, it's going to cost me this amount of money. And so without the data and without the integration and all of that data being in the same place as that single source of truth, we can't make those kinds of business decisions to move forward. So again, I'm going back to my word of integration.
Yeah.
Maureen?
Just,
Yes,
Oh,
I,
sorry.
my whole perspective on this is, and I saw one of the attendees that talked about lighting. This goes for lighting, whether you've got exterior lighting, it goes to sound. There's all of these other impacts that you talk about: health, well-being, and function, just the ability to be productive. And today, I think decisions need to be made. So as far as getting back in, there has to be some sort of a prioritization or roadmap from the business where they make some decisions so people can begin to map the way forward. And what's happening is people are kind of frozen right now, trying to understand what should they do. And I think one of the biggest expenses right now is this fact that people are out sitting at home. There's tremendous talent that are leaving companies and going. You can't miss an announcement each day about so-and-so's left here, so-and-so's joined here. And so the importance for the employers is to really start getting a very defined strategy about when and how they're going to return to work. And then they can figure out the mechanics of it, the logistics and the tactics. But I think what's happening is people are putting tactics first. The tactics will come. It's what is the strategy? How are you going to occupy this hybrid, remote, whatever, and then get to it, so people can see a way forward and have more confidence.
Steve?
so, so many of the buildings are occupied by tenants where the building owner has really control over the control system, right? And so I think what you're going to see are tenants negotiating stronger contracts with the building owner around the operational variables that we've talked about, particularly around indoor air quality. And I think there, if I'm sitting in the space, how do I know whether the space has good air quality or not? I think we do need some better metrics by which I, as a tenant, could look at that metric and say, okay, I'm confident. So CO2, as we know, that is, if it gets over 1,000 parts per million, we know you're going to get sleepy. Your effectiveness is going to drop off. There's been lots and lots of studies around that, and it doesn't take much to get over 1,000. You get in a small conference room, just people just sitting around the room, it's going to jump from 300, 400 parts per million to 1,000 within just like 10 minutes. So, but the way the control systems are designed, if the space in that temperature is comfortable, it's going to shut down the dampers. And now you're not going to get decent airflow into the space. So if I, as a tenant, say, hey, I want to maintain below 1,000 at all times for my CO2, okay, now I put some pressure on the building owner to essentially require that they put through enough clean air, outside air to solve that particular problem. And if they add into that decent filtration, good HEPA filtration, then I've got a better chance that the air that's being recirculated is going to be cleaned of whatever contaminants are in it. So I know a lot of companies have tried to look at not just filtration, but things like bipolar ionization filtration and ultraviolet filtration, and even hydrogen peroxide aerosols. There's a variety of companies that are coming into the space to try to purify the air. And I think it's early still, frankly, relative to these technologies, but there's no getting around getting your outside air quantities up. That's the best thing you can do for sure, along with filtration. That's a guaranteed solution. But yeah, I I would want to know that my CO2 levels are being controlled well as a tenant, and be able to see that without having to call somebody in the facilities department and asking them.
I think that's fair enough. And that kind of leads to this audience question that we have we're being asked, what metrics do you think would be important to define a safe workplace? And I think, Steve, you just offered one. And how would you set up a monitoring system for those metrics? So which metrics, if we were to pick 3 metrics that are the most important to define a safe, and by that, I think we also mean healthy, workplace, what would we say those metrics are? Anybody want to volunteer an answer?
I just have a few that I would mention.
Sure.
I think there's actually several, because you have to look at it as far as everything from the quality of the voice, like if you're, depending on what phone systems you're using. So believe it or not, that really matters to your effectiveness of how you can work throughout the day. And again, I go back to noise level and lighting levels, but some of the other things that create a safe work environment is everything from the active shooter and resiliency. Does the building have uptime? I mean, these are all realities of what is the business continuity planning? Have they gone through their drills for evacuation? And depending on the company, not everyone does things the same way. And employers have to deal with, you can't kind of push all the way that to the back and say, no, I'm just going to deal with COVID, right?
Right.
So these are all factors that come into a very kind of, it's like a mosaic almost when you look at ESG. So there's the environmental piece. There's also your social impact piece with the communities. What are you doing as far as all of your stakeholders? And then the governance and compliance. And that's really where tech is coming in a great way, because I saw someone write about dashboards, and Darlene talked about integration and data, and Steve's talking about the operating environment. And all these pieces have to come together and fuse. My word was fusion, in that you're creating an environment that has to be mindful of all these aspects, because it's the area that you're not thinking about that's going to be the one that's going to cause you to have an issue with your resiliency, which means you're not as sustainable. You've got a big risk problem with your compliance.
Thank you. Maybe we should pause at this point to see if Marcella, have you got the accumulation of the audience's suggested words for the smart workplace today?
I do. Let me share my screen.
Thank you.
Here you go.
So this would be the list of the words that the members of the audience have suggested, like we did as experts on what could possibly describe the smart workplace of tomorrow. I think Zoom has a screen sharing problem today, because normally neither Marcella nor I have problems with this.
Are you not seeing it?
No.
I see it.
I see it.
We see it, it's there.
It looks
Oh,
great.
Okay.
Complex
All right.
information,
Yeah, there it
all
is.
saved. Yeah.
All right, here it is. I've got it on a second monitor here. So from the audience side, the words integrated, Darlene, I think you're the winner today. Integrated seems to be very popular. Informational, it comes up. Complex, the fusion, cheap, cost, expedited, cyber secure, booming, distant, transparent, analytics, efficient, dynamic. Unobtainium, I kind of like that one. Unobtainium. I have no idea what it means, but I have visions of what it means. Unobtainium. And hybrid, of course, talent, optimistic, opportunity, and automated. So, okay, if you look at what our panel is saying, and if you look at all these words, and if we have an audience with a lot of integrators in it, you have opportunity, a lot of things that need to be integrated. And if you're a solution provider, the businesses, the tenants, and the building owners need a lot of solutions and a lot of advice and a lot of people to sort it out at the moment. So in that sense, there's opportunity and the ability to move into some new thing. I mean, if you have somebody that has a solution for air quality and they have never had a reseller channel or some way to get to market, then they're naturally going to be open to people saying, look, I have clients that need this and I'd like to represent you. Okay, I'd like to move to, there was an article, called The 5 Futures for the Post-COVID-19 Workplace. And I don't think it's necessary for anybody to have read the article or to go in some depth, but I'm going to summarize some of their key scenarios and ask my panel just to quickly address their viewpoints on the scenario. The author came to these conclusions on 5 considerations for a post-COVID-19 workplace. Scenario 1, the conclusion was past is prologue. It discussed how it's tempting for some companies and some owners to say, when this is over, we go back. And I think Darlene even mentioned that early on. Is there a turning the clock back? Is that going to happen? Anyone want to step forward to take that?
Yeah, so I can kind of tie that into a question that you asked earlier as well in terms of metrics. And one of the things that we really haven't talked about a lot is the metrics of employee satisfaction and occupant experience, because the buildings exist for the purpose of creating a safe, healthy, and productive work environment. So everything we do, whether it's energy management, indoor air quality, occupant detection, all of the different metrics need to ultimately be focused on occupant experience and how do we create a better occupant experience for the end users. I think one of the other things we really haven't touched upon is the difference between kind of the traditional reactive operations versus predictive operations. And when you get to a point where you can start collecting data and understanding trends in the workplace, you can start to predict what's going to happen in the future. So if you know that your occupancy is 80% on Mondays and 40% on Fridays, you're going to do things differently on Fridays than you're going to do on Mondays. So I think being able to collect all this data and understand whether it's use of space, whether it's energy, whether it's indoor air quality, and use all that data to really create your roadmap and really have a plan for how you're going to manage your facilities. And we keep saying post-COVID. I'm saying, forgetting about COVID, everything we've talked about today should have been status quo from the beginning. So, all of the different tools and technologies and solutions and everything that we've talked about should be the way that we operate the buildings, regardless of whether there's a global pandemic that we're responding to.
I can only say amen to that. It certainly sounds like the right way. In their scenario too, they talk about sanitation and safety, but I think we've covered that, folks, that we've said it will persist indefinitely and should, but here was an interesting one in scenario 3. It said catch the culture, and it asked the question, where does the heart of the organization be? That is, where is your company culture if you have work from home in a hybrid situation? That's kind of an interesting, point.
But Bob, I'd really like to pick up on that.
Sure,
because
please.
I think that is, as a business, trying to create a culture, particularly for the upcoming generation, and trying to do that remotely is at cross purposes. So, people coming out of high school or college, I think very much need to be in an environment where the company leadership and both middle management and senior management are easily accessible. So they can be coached, they can be observed, they can be trained, and they can go through that necessary learning curve in a practical, effective manner. And I just don't believe that trying to do that remotely is going to be effective. And yes, transmitting the company culture is a part of that, but it's really making somebody who's coming out of school feel like they're part of something. And it's just very hard to do that if they're going to be working from home as their first job. I don't see that happening. We've got to get back into buildings where we can continue to build relationships, and through those relationships to transmit the necessary knowledge for people to learn and be effective in the work that they do.
I
Thank
think
you.
that some of the ideas around brand and culture do go back to company values and the way leaders lead and the way people interact with each other. And you can see that companies that have done the right thing over the last 12 months versus companies that may have come off a little harsh with their employees, you can kind of see the fallout from that. So you've got to walk the walk. It really does start with, what are your values? What is the purpose of your company? What's your mission? And then what's your commitment to the environment, to your stakeholders? It really starts from there. Place is important as far as where you do have place. What does your brand and your values reflect in the way you consume the space, in the way you curate the space, all the way from the experience that employees have? But Leisman came out with a great study a couple of months ago, and people's experiences vary dramatically from how effective they can be. And some like to be remote all the time. Some struggle mightily because they're not really set up to be remote, and they do feel like they're missing out. Some of the points Steve made. And I do believe the hybrid, Bob, you mentioned the hybrid. Each company does have a different culture. They do have a different mission. Some are manufacturing, some are service companies, some are heavy sales organizations. But at the end of the day, there's a dire need to go back right now. And Mark, where you are as an organization, as far as everything from diversity and inclusion and your commitment to local communities, to the types of space you're providing to your employees, really looking at your commitment to ESG and the environment, and where are you coming out on that? And then what can you do to create the right type of workplace environment that reflects what you stand for? And if companies feel that, if your employees feel that your company is aligned there, you'll get much more buy-in from your employees around that than if you say one thing and do another. I think people don't like the idea of their firm being disingenuous and not being honest with them, and then they lose their trust, and then it kind of all goes from there.
Mhm. I would absolutely agree with that. I think that we have to focus on the fact that there is no one size fits all. There is no, everybody has to come back from work, come back to work, or everybody has to stay home. I think organizations need to understand the personas of their workforce, and they need to understand how people work best and how people are most productive and where people are happiest. And if that means, again, the hybrid and flexibility, there are people that would prefer to come back to work every day. There are people who are going to be much more productive not coming back to work. They're going to feel happier. They're going to feel safer, more secure, and they're going to do their best work by remaining at home. And then also, if you balance all those other metrics that we talked about, think about how it impacts your carbon footprint to not commute to work every day, to not get on a plane and fly across the country to go to the corporate office once a month. So there are always going to be trade-offs in terms of, the benefits and the detriments of all of the above. And I think that the key here is really understanding your workforce, using the data around how that workforce works best, and being able to make the right business decisions for your company based on the different personas within your organization.
We have folks only 2 minutes left, so I wanted to throw out one last thing quickly, but I'm going to have to ask for a hard stop in this couple of minutes. But what is the best way for an integrator, installer, reseller with limited experience? I mean, they have technology experience, but in the company offerings in workplace and health. Darlene, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you, for example, with your company and your integrated, software, if somebody new comes to you, how do you set up to bring them into that business?
So I'll tell you, I've spent most of my professional career in a consulting position. And whether that's when I was in sales for specific companies, I was a consultant. Whether I had my own business, I had a consulting business. When I went to JLL and led the Smart Workplace program, I was a consultant. At Plan On, I'm a Smart Workplace consultant. So when you're looking at how do you select the right products and services, the right vendors, how do you put together that roadmap? You need to make sure that you've got trusted advisors in the industry that know what they're talking about. And whether that's hiring a consultant or turning to your vendors as the trusted advisor, But I think all of us, Maureen and Steve included in that, I mean, I think we've spent most of our professional lives teaching, educating, consulting, collaborating. The fact that I've known Maureen and Steve probably most of my professional career, I mean, these are the experts in the industry that know how to help companies get from point A to point B and put together that long-term roadmap.
Thank you very much. We're now on the 8 o'clock. Steve, did you want a last word? I mean, I hope I haven't neglected you there. You know, anything you'd like to add quickly?
You know, problems always create opportunities. So I think it's each systems integrator has a definite opportunities in front of them to, for sure, help these building owners make their buildings safer and more, make them safer for the returning occupants, and focus on, particularly on indoor air quality and the things they can do with either monitoring or improving the HVAC functionality to achieve that outcome. So that's would be my focus for the people I know.
What a great end note. You've been a wonderful panel. Thank you, Maureen, Darlene, and Steve. I'm going to turn it over to Marcella for the close.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. Thanks to the listeners and to the panel today. The recording will be available at avixa.org/webinars within about 5 business days, and your 1 RU credit will be applied to your transcripts within 5 to 7 business days. If you have questions, please contact webinars@avixa.org. A huge thank you to Bob and guests for providing insights into understanding how COVID-19 has altered the smart workplace and impacted the smart building market, creating opportunities as well as forcing change. Our next Smart Buildings Power Hour webinar will be held on May 19th. The topic is BIM and digital twin. The BIM model aids the design and construction of a smart building, while the digital twin takes the as-built model, layers a continuous flow of sensor data over it, and produces value-generating analytics. Both are vital to the smart building industry. To register, go to avixa.org/events. We hope you've enjoyed. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, panel. You were